What happens when you combine the most innovative, eccentric and charismatic leaders, disruptors and founders from tech, with the pedigree and history of one of the most established institutions within the City of London? The Searching for Mana podcast will be produced in partnership with the London Stock Exchange. I'm Lloyd Wahed, the host of Searching for Mana. We're going to be interviewing some of the leaders, influencers and disruptors in the tech space, where I'm going to be trying to dig in and find out what's their mana, their superpower, their magic. Maja, welcome on to the Searching for Mana show.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here, and it's good to see you again.
Yes, likewise. Maja and I crossed paths in wonderful Miami at the Swell Ripple event at the back end of 2024. And it is now beginning of October in 2025. Time flies, and you have some incredibly exciting updates. So without further ado, firstly, thank you so much for taking your precious time to come on the show. Really excited to get stuck into a bunch of things. Maja, you're in some sort of a mega trend right now. If we look at the highest level, you're across many things in an investment capacity, of course, and we can talk through that. But broadly speaking, the new venture is within digital assets, and then tokenization, and then digital asset treasury. So it's a mega trend. We're really interested to hear more. If you could be so kind, just to start off, to give anybody who doesn't know some context around who you are and what you're doing and what you're focused on right now, please.
Yeah, thank you so much for asking that. You are absolutely right. This is really a trend that is completely, I think, changing finance. It's quite interesting to watch. I think digital intelligence and digital assets are a future. I started in mobile payments in Africa and LATAM, and I know that's one of your interests is emerging markets. I started in that in early 2000s. I learned early days. I went to a program. I was selected to go to a program at Georgetown that was very much focused on geopolitics, and I was one of their top students at the time. Dare to say I was a nerd. I read a lot of books and cryptography, and I realized that really mobile money was something that I was curious about. I didn't know what it meant. I just became curious about code and payments and what it meant for emerging markets. And so I embarked on that journey and went on to Africa and Latin America, where I spent a number of years building mobile payments networks. In addition to mobile payments, I worked for private equity firms or project finance firms in emerging markets that focused on energy development, so electricity development, which kind of comes back full circle now to AI, which is really interesting because that was the early time where I realized that without the electricity, without the energy, we can't sustain our AI needs. And that really opened my eyes to difficulty of money movement. In every time I spoke to some friends in the Western world, they couldn't really understand what I was doing or the importance of it. But I couldn't even receive my own salary or pay other people in emerging markets because it was so difficult. The FX rates were high, interest rates were high, right? The inflation was high, and so in 2010, I read the Bitcoin white paper. And the only thing, Lloyd, in there that I understood was peer-to-peer. The rest went over my head completely. And I read the peer-to-peer, and I remember thinking, wow, like I get that. I get that because we were building that. We were before M-Pesa in Africa. And I thought to myself, if this is possible, like this is going to change the world, if it's possible. And then I went onto dark web like everybody else, right, to buy goodies. And I thought, wow, there's some really smart people, gamers and hackers and mathematicians and philosophers. And they were all kind of curious about Bitcoin. And at that time also, there were a lot of gamers that got kicked off PayPal. And they kept using Bitcoin. And And that's when I kind of went down the rabbit hole. But my work and life and kind of travel around the world, at that time I lived also, later I lived between London and a few places in Africa. And it led me to kind of forget about it. I basically forgot about Bitcoin for many years. And in 2013, I moved to New York and I started interviewing in hedge funds and various other companies. And in 2013, I got circled back into a community, and a buddy of mine that worked at KKR, who was a lawyer, and he called me up one day and he said, hey, look, I know you're interviewing, but maybe this is a kind of interesting opportunity. We can't do anything with them. It sounds very illegal, but maybe you can. And I said, what is it? And he said, it's something called Tether, and he couldn't even pronounce it. He didn't care. And he said, do you want to meet with the guys? And I said, yeah, sure, I'll meet with them. And that was the part of my crazy personality, right? Living in emerging markets in various places. And, I moved to Zanzibar without knowing where that place was on a map, because remember, we didn't have Google Maps at the time. And I met with John in Wall Street. We met on Fulton Street subway, close by in a cafe. And he explained what they were building in Tether. And I thought, okay, I don't understand much, but you're telling me you're going to go kind of against the dollar. You're going to create the synthetic dollar. I was like, okay, this sounds interesting. I don't want to work for you, but I'm happy to help you. What do you need? We need a bank, somebody that will bank us. And so sure enough, they had a target, and I signed an advisory agreement to basically help them acquire first bank for Tether. And that's where the kind of my entry point. After that, the doors opened and I started meeting some of the most interesting people in the space, cyberpunk guys, who basically were just completely, they saw where the world was going early days. To them, even speaking about, today tokenization is kind of a mainstream conversation. To them at the time, they saw tokens as a complete disruption to the whole system. They didn't know how it was going to play out. So I started surrounding myself with people that were exceptionally smart, completely different thinkers than I was, and what I came from, except one thing. I came from emerging markets and I understood the difficulty of money. Yeah. And they came from cryptography and kind of the underground movement and anti-establishment, and they understood difficulty of money. And that's where we met. We had two different points of view. At a first Satoshi roundtable, I very quickly told the Bitcoin core that the Bitcoin is not going to take over the world in the next 5 years. It's going to take much longer. They were completely against me, thinking that Bitcoin is going to run the world and be the main currency within 5 years. And I said, it might be, but definitely it's going to take more than 20 years to get there. And so those are the only things that we had difference in opinion. And then, we'll get into the rest of the conversation. The rest is history, after, how I got into Ethereum and the rest of the crypto.
Yeah, it's amazing. So before we get to that moment, if you go back, you were saying that you started going down the rabbit hole once you saw that Bitcoin paper. And it makes sense because, let's say early fintech payments, as you say, there's a real parallel with, there's an issue, and remittance, FX was one of the main ones. But really underneath it, the infrastructure and the technology wasn't changing. Just the notion and the appetite to fix it was with, at that point, websites and the emergence of distributed social media. And so you can look back and you can insult it and say it's just good UX, but it's on the same kind of rusty rails. There's obviously nuance in between, but broadly speaking, the infrastructure hadn't changed as significantly as the internet coming along. At what moment is it then, or is it post Tether guys? Is it more recently? Did you have an aha moment where, whether it was 5 years or whether it was 25 years, you thought, okay, this is it. This is going to be as big, if you do, as the internet. This is finance coming online, and this is going to be able to fix the universe of challenges and opportunity.
Wow, what a great question. And a lot of people look for that answer. A lot of people don't really ask that question, and it's very powerful because that allows us to then see and pick up on other trends too. When you start to think about what are those ingredients, I think there were two things for me. One was a combination of my background. I think I was a refugee as a child. I saw my really well-to-do parents lose everything overnight, where banks just shut it down. You can't own anything. That's it. You can't, that was it. You don't control anything. You don't have anything, and just, you can't go pick up your money, and it disappears. The second thing is that also during the war, when we were crossing the border and escaping, the Yugoslavia as it is ceased to exist. And therefore, our passports, my name, my identity ceased to exist. If that was on a blockchain, if that was on a mutable record of some sorts, if that was on a global record, or if that was on some kind of a system that I owned as my own identity, but no, I was owned by that state, which basically ceased to exist. And so that was for me a very powerful grounds for how I observed the world. I think that's an important point of view. And I think when I approached Africa and Latin America in my work during that time, I realized the difficulty of money and an interaction with money has to change at some point. And so when I started to interact with the community in crypto, that was the second part that ended up changing my mind, because I met people who were questioning the full existence of everything we have, of how we transfer value, how we transfer information, what is a sovereign identity, how will that transform large companies, how will that transform governments. And when you hear these things, you tend to question more, right? And the last part that kind of, as they say, broke the camel's back is when I was at GE. And right after, as I told you, I've interviewed, I had an amazing opportunity to go into GE and learn from some of the smartest people there. But I brought them blockchain, right? They were already doing machine learning. They were already talking about AI and predictive analytics when it wasn't really sexy, right? But they weren't doing anything in blockchain. And so I saw a huge opportunity of really a platform where I could test smart contracts and see how really smart they were. Like, were these smart contracts really smart? And what did that actually mean? Because here I was, 1 foot in a cyberpunk community and a kind of anti-establishment community of crypto, right? But I needed to root that in reality, because I'm a pretty real and kind of real person and authentic and more kind of rooted in things that I needed to feel and sense and see where they were going. And so what better place than a place like GE, where you can use the real data sets and deploy these smart contracts and see how difficult would this be to change the organization. Well, that took a while. I got kicked out of boardrooms twice, when we spoke about Bitcoin and using airline engine electricity from GE to mine Bitcoin. That was one of my ideas, right? But that changed. That was also that breaking moment, is because I realized that those smart contracts, when deployed with machine learning, is an absolute game changer. And AI actually in the future would need a faster highway to do anything, and it cannot sustain itself on the old infrastructure. And that, when we launched that first trade finance deal on a blockchain between JP Morgan and GE, that's what I thought, okay, combination of all those things that I told you, and that specific moment, I thought, okay, this is the industry I'm not leaving. And so I would say it was a combination of a couple of things for me.
Amazing. Some people seem to be, over a career, remarkable at looking around the corner and making good predictions. It would seem that way with you. The scenario you have there is
just literally come back, or not scenario, the potential that you were discussing there. We've had two mega trends in, just call it the blockchain, and the different cycles, and then likewise worked through all the different incarnations of data analytics, machine learning, data science, decision science, the cloud, and then AI finally has what I would imagine may well be, and it's always easy to say it in the 5 years where the biggest thing is the biggest thing, but the biggest impact on everything for the next 20 years. Let's just say that that's looking relatively obvious. Now you're starting to see, and it's not anymore because it's like crypto's dead, so can crypto suddenly AI itself? It's like, okay, it feels like digital assets blockchain is here with use case. AI is absolutely wild. Every single company is going to become an AI company or die. And then, like, back to your thesis, do you now, and how would you predict those two things come together? Because it's not inevitable. I don't see a mega trend there yet. What would you see the user cases being? I'd love to hear you talk about that and the timing around it and what we might see.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I don't think it's prime time yet. I wrote an article back in 16 or 17 or something where everybody was saying, oh, blockchain is taking over the world. Same thing they're saying today about AI. AI is just going to take all your jobs like tomorrow. By the way, it was yesterday. And you're like, I don't think so, right? If you're really rooted in some reality and you understand how large organizations operate, you understand how human beings operate, what's in the interest of a human being, right? And the interest of a human being is still primal. It's our safety. It's our jobs, right? You start to understand it's going to take much longer for that to impact us. So I think you're absolutely right. That's not something that you see now at scale. However, I do think there are real use cases, to your point. The real use cases are predictive analytics, right, and industrials. That's already there. If people question that, they should just go read some things with, Siemens and GEs of the world, right? Those are things that have been kind of working in the last 5 years at scale. And that's mostly on industrials because industrials have been working in machine learning, as you know, for a long time. This is for the last 20 years plus, right? The retail side, I think, is probably what you're alluding to. That's not what we're seeing yet. We're going to start to see it a little bit more with travel and with some finance, certainly more in healthcare that I'm seeing. But nothing at scale where, if I look here throughout the window and I think that, this whole neighborhood is going to be impacted by this in the next 5 years, and everybody's just going to be, somehow in the back of their, device, it's going to be blockchain and AI and marriage, it's not there yet. But in isolated cases of travel and, certain payments and finance and trading, it is there. And I think the next 2-3 years is going to start to pick up more. There is a large conversation around AI agents and blockchain, right, in Web3, and that is kind of, and DeSci is decentralized science. It's a beautiful use case. It's, when you think about it, right, and let's break it down. DeSci is an ability for things that, for example, don't get a lot of traction, get funded by community. And it's just decentralized finance, right? You suddenly have let's say you want to solve a certain type of disease and you have an amazing scientist who hasn't had an opportunity to do it and has an invention, and now you can fund that really fast. That it's an amazing use case, but is it happening at scale yet? No, it is very hard, right? Because great projects have an enormous amount of demand. They get filled up really fast when they go out there. Now, could you say, can it be done more at scale and in much larger numbers and globally, right? Why don't we allow people, let's say scientists in Nigeria or in Saudi or in Argentina, right? Yeah, absolutely. That's part of that tokenization. That's part of, I think, what you also believe in. It's the decentralization of value that we have an opportunity to do with blockchain. So I would say those are some of the things.
Yeah, I'm just always trying to learn what I believe, what I hope for is now always seem like I'm somewhere in between an optimist and a cynic, where you understand the constraints of how long things take, but suddenly you get the conviction it's coming and you need to predict. the order of what's coming. And yeah, I agree with what would appear to be over the next 3 years coming through in that zone is this type of agents, and particularly for high frequency trading. It just makes so much sense that that's going to come through. And you know, you go back to the idealistic conversations where people think about, which is wonderful, every single possible solution that you know, could be afforded. You know, some might never happen, and some will come then in phase 2 and phase 3. So I think we're in a really exciting phase where the infrastructure, technology, belief, talent, investment is in place. And then this next phase, really anything to do with the blockchain predominantly feels to me like it's investment and finance that absolutely massively takes the lead. And of course, you know, you can have philanthropic and project-based enterprise that comes out of that. But again, if you look, mostly the successful ones are basically investment funds at the moment in our space. In AI, it's much broader. And so that's a fascinating question when you take it on its own and you start seeing, you know, Claude coffee shops just emerging where people are now, you know, going to intellectualize their thinking that they're doing with this tool. And you're like, wow, you've not seen anything like this since Apple, really. And I do think that if you look out your window in 5 years' time, like the effect that just AI has on everything, I mean, God knows, it's incredibly exciting. What do you think about one of the Mana round questions, but I'll do it now as we're on the topic, is, you know, if you are doomsday or optimist around AI, and it's easy to go either way, how are you starting to think about that on employment markets?
So meaning like doomsday, like, is it negative to have the AI at scale, or positive in terms of like labor and the impact on labor?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think there's a book out at the moment, I'll put it in the show notes, which is basically like, whoever builds it has killed humans.
Okay.
And we're getting close to this kind of like, you know, exponential liftoff zone where there's, you know, real AGI potential, and there's many different predictions about when that actually happens. But I mean, certainly I'm in a position where I can see a lot of strategic or professional service roles just easily can be eliminated based on the prompt engineering I can do and the results I can get and the efficiency I can get. And so here's the question. In history, this happens the whole time. And people then are doomsday and are like, so everyone will lose their job. And every single time in history, the economic cookie grows, more jobs happen, and it's actually positive. So people from Silicon Valley are broadly going to say like this one, and then a lot of the rest of the world are going to be like, this one, where are you?
It's a broad question you asked. And so one of the reasons why at FG Nexus we chose Ethereum as an underlying asset for our treasury is because the Ethereum ERC 8004 was where I started changing my mind about AI. And what that proposed kind of standard says, it describes the trustless on-chain AI agents that can hold and that can fund, that can interact with DeFi, that can sign transactions, and they follow actual programmable rules, right? With the AI logic on top of it. When I read about this, I thought to myself, okay, well, this is where AI starts to run my life. And so I think we are not there yet, to your question, like, where am I on that spectrum? I do think that next 2 to 3 years, you're going to start to see some significant impact, as I talked about, you know, travel and finance and everything else. But I think the longer impact on the majority of the world is going to come much, much later. And I think AI does add to human jobs. And again, remember last year, I don't know if you remember last year, there were a couple of conferences in globally where everybody talked about and said, you know, next year, X amount of jobs will be replaced, and, you know, 400 million jobs will go out, and there will be no more of those jobs. Well, a lot of those jobs are still there. A lot of those people still have those jobs. So there's not going to be any mass massive layoffs. But I do think that in the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to start to see a lot of jobs significantly shift, right? So real pressure will come to middle skill jobs. So think of analysts, think of coordinators, at least what I've seen. Think of even professional roles like that demand kind of, like legal roles, for example. Some analytical roles. I mean, the more managerial and higher level roles are going to be harder to replace because those jobs, one, people have enormous amount of experience. Sales, I don't see how they're going to be replaced, right? Not yet. It's a very much human job. And if I think of long-term, 15 to 30 years out, general purpose AI can probably do most economically valuable work. And then you're looking at kind of a true labor market transformation. That's 15 to 30 years. I mean, that's still far away. And if you asked me about 15 years ago, when I used to speak to folks, people thought in the next 5 years, most of the jobs will be replaced by AI. So I think AI evolves with humans versus revolutionize us in some way, right? We evolve with AI. And I actually think that this is a little bit different than before. More humans now and a couple of generations in a row will actually evolve with AI versus be completely replaced by AI, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, fascinating things to think through, and we can go through in a more extended version on a follow-up call. But I would love to ask, because we haven't really covered FG Nexus.
Yeah.
If you could, now we've got some context about who you are. I want to know more, but now we've got some context. You just lay out how you came to this opportunity, explain to the audience what it is you guys have and do today, and then I suppose threaded into that, which is why I bring it up now, is why did, I know you roughly alluded to, but why did you choose Ethereum? There are many digital asset treasuries that are emerging at the moment, and people are choosing Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana. This will be ad nauseum, and be interesting to see when it's just across them all and there's various strategies. But nonetheless, you've come out and started acquiring Ethereum. Could you talk us through some of that thesis and give us some context, please?
Yeah, so FG Nexus is a treasury vehicle, right? It's a digital asset treasury vehicle, similar to those that are not familiar with it, similar to MicroStrategy and others. And we raised $200 million in the last 2 months, and we've bought all Ethereum. And now we're staking all that Ethereum. And so we keep doing that over and over again. We have a $5 billion ATM. And so we're in the market for really growing ETH per share. Now, here's where we're extremely different. And here is where I am not afraid to talk about, so what? After you've raised capital, you're stacking ETH. Okay, great. So what's the next step? So number one, I think why we chose Ethereum, this landed on my desk serendipitously through a friend of mine who I've known for 15 years. They backed Metaplanet, and they said they wanted to do similar in the US. They see a huge opportunity in tokenization and stablecoins, and they wanted to kind of embark on this journey. But this first step was, as there was an opportunity to do so, there was a huge demand from the investors. We went out to a market, and at the time when we were raising, by the way, Lloyd, there were other 10 ETH firms that were raising, and none of them are in the market at the moment. That says a lot, because I don't believe that you need 10 ETH treasuries or 10 Solana treasuries or 10 Bitcoin treasuries, right? And we were successfully able to raise from also famous investors such as Citadel and Point72 and many others. And the goal is much bigger than just stacking ETH. So the reason why, to answer that question, the reason why we chose ETH is, I'll go back to early days of when I first got interacted with ETH, which was during the crowd sale. And then while I was at GE, I invited Joe Lubin to come into General Electric and help me really execute on my vision, where I wanted to deploy those smart contracts, as I talked about, in a number of different pilots. And that's where I had the first kind of hands-on experience with what it meant to really deploy these smart contracts and how the world was going to change. And so in the last, Joe Lubin has done an incredible job with Consensus. I think you're very familiar with it. I mean, they're everywhere, right? You go to any part of the globe that talks about crypto, and Consensus is somewhere there. And he's done an incredible job of kind of disseminating that information, teaching people about smart contracts and impact of Ethereum. And that has been now 10 years. Ethereum celebrated 10 years now in August. And so the Ethereum has had a number of years where it's gone in front of large institutions, governments, and it's been teaching them around, what it means to be in a decentralized world. How can you really deploy smart contracts? How are stable coins going to grow, right? How is tokenization going to disrupt the financial system that we live in? So there was this passage of time, right, that Ethereum has that others don't, because think about it, all the other L1s came after, and really none of them are with institutions at the moment. Each of them, except maybe XRP, you could say, each of them has chosen a lane. AVAX is more on the entertainment and sports, and Solana is more on meme coins and gaming, right? And so each of them has chosen that lane, where Ethereum has clearly been chosen over and over and over again for three things: corporate institutional pilots, stable coins. This is 65-70% of stable coins in the world are on Ethereum, and tokenization. 54% of global assets are on Ethereum. To me, that was a clear winner. It is a stable technology. It has never been it's never stopped. It's never had issues, unlike Solana. Some people might say, oh, it's more expensive, it's not a people's chain, and etc. But reality is, you're talking about two different things. You've got retail and you've got institutions. Institutions really, a lot of times, don't care about the speed. They care about security, soundiness. They care about, resilience. They care about uptime. And so when I think about where most institutions have been building, that is on Ethereum. And so to me, that was a clear choice of why. Another reason, if I may, is because we partnered with TradFi folks, right? We've partnered with what Fundamental Global, it was called Fundamental Global before, and we turned it into FG Nexus. And FG Nexus comes from Nexus of TradFi and crypto, right? Because I'm a long time in crypto, really long experience and deep experience in crypto, while the other co-founder, Kyle Seminara, is very TradFi, extreme experience in TradFi. He worked for Steve Cohen for a while. And so that's a nexus of kind of group of people that came together to build this company. And they could really digest also Ethereum in a much faster way than they could anything else, because this was their first time kind of interacting with crypto.
Wow, amazing. So many questions. It's really interesting for us to have a few of these shows out in quick succession, because your good friend and peer, Kyle of ticker Forward Industries, has just been on the show, and of course he is one of the predominant.
All Solana.
Yeah, on the team Solana, and was not afraid to elaborate on why he turned away from Ethereum and went to Solana. And so I'm just sat here listening, and both of you are very compelling. And and you would of course be able to think about this in the balanced way you just described it as well. What hopefully happens is that there are a few protocols that are incredible and are defined at various things, in Solana I think probably is able to take internet capital markets to retail, and I'm sure do damage in institutional world as well. But when you quote the metrics that you just did and you think about how institutions would think, Ethereum is clearly in an incredible position as well. And that tends to be how significant infrastructure works. You tend to have a few that maybe geographically or based on nuance, really go and dominate. And that makes complete sense to me. My question would be, because it's how I would be thinking, which I'm keen to find out why I'm incorrect, is what's the roadmap? So you guys are different for a few reasons. I mean, the backing that you've got is significant. There's a fundamentally very interesting business here. You are in a bull market. The big question is, okay, we move to a bear market, then how does this strategy work? But for me, the question is more than that. I know you'll be thinking, how do you win in that bear market? And what are you fundamentally going to do within the Ethereum ecosystem beyond obviously acquiring Ethereum into the treasury at a good price and making the equity that's listed higher? What do you do to achieve that? I'd love to hear some of the strategy and thinking there, please, Maja.
Yeah. First, look, I think we're going to be in a multi-chain world, right? So I think, look, I love Kyle, known Kyle for many years. And I don't think that there's going to be one winner, right? I think it's crazy to me that people get on these podcasts and things like that and say, this is going to win and it's going to rule the whole world, right? It's insane. I think.
And to be clear, he didn't.
Yeah, no. Absolutely. No, I'm not saying he did. I'm saying there are people out there who definitely claim, even Ethereum, right? Like, this is going to be the way. And I actually think we're going to live in a multi-chain world. There's an opportunity for everybody. By the way, this is what you're seeing. I don't know, Lloyd, if you've been paying attention, but Stripe has launched their own blockchain. Google has launched their own blockchain, right? Circle has launched their own blockchain. So we are going to see something really interesting. I wrote about it recently on my Substack, is that you will see people that have mass distribution launch their own chains. And that makes sense, right? So why should I go and borrow somebody else's chain if I can launch it myself and I have billions of users, right? Like, this is what Libra, by the way, tried to do years ago, if you remember. But and I was poached by Libra at the time in 2019, and I told the CMO that this will never work, and they were shocked. Why I said this will never work is because I understood that government was never going to allow something like this. Government was processing and taking the time to learn about stablecoins, and guess what's happening today? Government's pushing their own stablecoin, right? Part of what Christian Catalini at the time did with Libra is essentially what today's Genius Act is, right, on stablecoins. It's just the government was smarter. They were never going to allow some Silicon Valley dudes, right, to be ruling the world with stablecoins. But I think it's really fascinating to think that everybody that has a large distribution really is thinking about how do they own everything vertically. And that's what Stripe has recently done in Google. Now, is that going to succeed or not? That's a whole different conversation. Yeah. To go back to FG Nexus, it's a fair question you asked about bull market and the bear market. And so we've deliberately built FG Nexus to be cycle resistant. Okay, that's very important to understand. It's not just a momentum play for us. This was never a momentum play for me from the beginning. And yes, we are in a bull market now, right, currently, but our roadmap, isn't dependent on some kind of a price. Sure, if Ethereum does well, we do well too. But if Ethereum, is also stable and it keeps growing steadily, nothing kind of crazy, we have three pillars for our strategy. Number one is ETH accumulation is structured for a long term, and that's similar to kind of MicroStrategy, the way they approached Bitcoin. But the difference between Bitcoin and Ethereum is that Ethereum is a productive asset, right? So we've added staking, we're thinking of restaking, we're thinking of a variety of other yield components that are really interesting in DeFi and liquid staking. So this gives you kind of when you hold Ethereum, it gives you kind of a base layer of programmable income, right? So it's not just a speculative bet of, if Ethereum goes to 15K, this is the only way that we do well. I'm seeing Ethereum being adopted in institutions, and so having a utility, and I think that this yield is becoming even sexier for a lot of corporates and a lot of treasuries out there, because they're trying to realize, oh, wow, I can actually hold an asset and earn a yield on it, right? I can create my own stable coin on Ethereum and earn a yield on it, right? So second thing that we focused on is we're building a kind of a tokenized capital market infrastructure. And what we mean by that is we've thought about where the world is going, and it's certainly going towards tokenization. And so we started with our own NASDAQ listed, shares. That was announced a couple of days ago. And this works in a bull or a bear market, right? It's issuance, settlement, and distribution really don't stop in downturns. In fact, the infrastructure adoption often accelerates when speculation cools. And so I would say that every time, in a bear market in crypto, we had a saying, great, I love that it's bear market because I can actually focus on building, right? So that's the second part. The last part, we are creating kind of a diversified operating cash flows. And so that's that we're thinking through at the moment. We're thinking through partnerships, we're thinking through custody, we're thinking through tokenization services, on-chain income rails. So the business doesn't really depend solely on that treasury appreciation. Now, focus currently is just to grow ETH per share and acquire as much ETH as possibly we can. But then everything else I just talked about is kind of in a discussion at the moment. And that's kind of, what we're thinking through, what would be the next best thing to do. I know you're in London and you could appreciate this. A lot of European firms are trying to get to US market and go public. And that's also an interesting opportunity, I think, for a lot of these treasury companies. Think about it. It's a powerful vehicle to hold because you are public on the market and there are a lot of crypto companies that want to go public. And suddenly you become a target, right? We've had 3-4 very large names approach us and say, hey, look, we'll take your stock, right? We want to go public, but we have to think about if that business is actually accretive to us or if it's negative to us. Does it add to our MNAV? Does it add to our growth in the future? So yes, we do benefit, like you and I individually, we benefit from the bull market, but the underlying strategy is to build a real kind of income generating, tokenized, focused, platform or a business that can keep compounding in bear markets too.
Yeah, well, so exciting, and it makes a load of sense to me, the point you're talking about, that really can create quite a large M&A drive. And if you think about what will also happen in the bear market is there might be treasuries that obviously all the ETH is the same price, but their equity is low. And so I think we're going to probably, to your point, end up with a few that represent various ecosystems, and some will represent, obviously different business opportunities by holding their equity. So super exciting to see how this plays out. I like all the things that you're saying. I'm going to ask because otherwise I feel like it's remiss. You need to become somebody, I think, who starts saying this a lot. What is your prediction on the price of Ethereum? At the moment, we are right at the beginning of October. Bitcoin as of yesterday going through ATH, and you have Ethereum close to
47,000, right? It was something like that.
Yeah, something like that. It's like it moves by $10 at the moment. I'm like, it's going to zero. It's just this moment right now where I don't know about you, but it feels to me like for so long it's felt like, is the market just going to consolidate? And it just keeps on not doing it. And I'm not sure it's going to. When's this going to stop? And it's going to 10, and I don't have a clue, but maybe you do. Could you give us some type of pricing predictions, please?
Yeah, I understand that everybody wants these numbers. So look, I don't really give price targets lightly. I've done it, once. I remember that I made a bet with somebody. Novograd said Bitcoin was going to, I don't remember, it was like 130. I said no way. We're not going there yet, and I was right. But let's kind of be real, right? Ethereum is a massively, I think personally, under-owned relative to its role, right, in the new financial system. So Bitcoin hitting all-time high first makes sense. right? It's a liquidity magnet. It is a government shutdown. In the last 7 days we've had in the US government shutdown. I've said it the other day, the longer the government shutdown persists, the more you're going to see the price movement in Bitcoin, positive price movement. And I'm not saying that the government shutdown is the only reason that Bitcoin went up, certainly not, but it is really interesting that investors have rotated, and it was very clear, they rotated into hard assets such as gold and silver and Bitcoin, right? Yeah. But Ethereum is kind of an infrastructure trade, okay? It's the rails for stable coins, as we talked about, tokenized treasuries, AI agents, real world assets, everything serious that's happening on chain is consolidated on ETH. So we are still early in that capital market cycle where tokenized, money market funds and equities and wholesale settlements are just starting. So I would say prediction for me, Ethereum will close the cycle with a price that shocks even optimists. I think, without giving you a number, and particularly if we have another Fed rate cut. If the Fed rate cuts pause, which there is some conversation about that this morning, then you'll still see the upward trend, but not as much. Now, if we have another cut, you're probably going to see much more movement. The second thing that's going to impact Ethereum price is if Trump does award those stimulus checks, right? There's a conversation around that. Now, one interesting thing for the US, and this is more for the US population, but it does impact global liquidity in crypto, is once you give those stimulus checks, this is different than COVID. Why? Because the price of healthcare in the US is going up significantly, I think by 80% this coming year. So people are going to use a lot of those stimulus checks towards the basics, right? So remember how during COVID, all those almost stimulus checks went into gambling on Robinhood and crypto, right? And so now I think and this might be my prediction, is that you're going to see a lot of those stimulus checks go towards the basics, and then some will spill over into kind of crypto, and you will see a pickup in the price as well. So I think that I could see Ethereum by end of this year, definitely going to 7K potentially, if all of those things stack up. But I wouldn't be surprised if it goes higher.
Amazing. And your prediction, if we then cast out and all these trends that need to come through and do live on it in 3 years, is it just exponentially higher, right? Which is why being on top of the amount of ETH that you have and will have is going to be such a great investment. Just to switch gears, let's go through the Mana round. I'm going to start with the first question. I spoke to you. So this just be a series of 4-ish questions, which we ask most people. Feel free to answer as briefly or elaborate as much as you want. On this one, however, I'd like you to talk about, because there's so many great relationships that you've had. I'd like you to talk about who you have really been inspired by. And I know we've spoke about Joe Lubin, but I know you have connections with Tether founders, Ethereum founders, and ad nauseum. So many people that I'd love on the show, so many people who have inspired and built this space. But if you could just, put a spotlight on one of those and give us some context, and then get them on the show for me, then that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. Always happy to connect. That. So, it's a difficult question. I have as you probably may suspect, I have a deep spiritual side, and I was taught not to idealize people, and have kind of, in spiritual world, you don't really idealize, because everybody has their faults and everything else. However, I think I know there were many people along this journey that really inspired me. And I'm not sure there's only one, really, because this technology and the people I've met through this technology have all contributed to where we are today. There isn't one person that kind of saw it all. right? You can say, yeah, Vitalik and Joe Lubin and Gavin Wood, right, created Ethereum, and Satoshi, whoever he, she, them are, you know, they also gave us this system. Yeah, sure, but then it takes a while to develop that. You know, there were different things. So I think people that I admire that have shown a personality that I really admire is resilience and inclusiveness. And those are Brian Armstrong from Coinbase. He is exceptionally resilient. We also have a passion together in longevity, right? That's a resilient person. That's a resilient, that he's gone against the government, right? He's gone against, you know, and not in a bad way, just kind of teaching them about evolution of assistance and opportunities that we have around the world. Folks that have shown that constant persistence to educate, in addition to push the regulation and nudge the old system and include more people into the system, are what I really admire. And also that collaboration. I think we live in a world, I think you are absolutely crazy if you think that you can make things on your own anymore. It is impossible. The amount of information, the speed of information with AI, with projects coming, with, you know, tasks being amended, with new incoming folks, you know, for global markets, there is no way you can build a project in isolation anymore. You have got to collaborate with people. And you see that with TradFi and crypto. You see you know, old folks from TradFi coming in, and it's like, oh, I'm building this, you know, and this is ours. And you're like, wow, that is not a crypto ethos, right? That is not something that I was brought up with in crypto. It's more kind of, wow, Lloyd is building the tokenization platform. Okay, how can we collab? Like, is there something that I can add? Where can we make money together, right? Where can we open markets? How can I open doors for him, right? Because that is going to come back, because this space is kind of, you know, it's huge and everybody knows each other. So I would say people like Brian Armstrong, for me, have been exceptional to see. Look, the founders of Tether, I remember having a discussion with the former CEO in Singapore, and his resilience and his vision for Tether were mind-blowing. Absolutely mind-blowing. Despite the FUD, despite the going, you know, SEC after them, despite all the governments not liking them, right? They had a vision, they had a long-term vision, and they stuck to it with a solid team, with collaboration. They were always happy to collaborate with folks. They still are today. They're launching partnerships. And to me, this is how you change the world. You have a vision that is rooted in something greater than themselves. Tether is bigger than themselves. Like, what they're doing around the world is bigger than any of these individuals themselves, right? And so Coinbase is bigger than Brian Armstrong, right? It's an entity on its own that is now impacting people around the world. And so I would say people like that have that resilience have really inspired me. And then
where would you the two of those organizations are so instrumental in the space today, and they're fundamentally so different. So you know, the cliche might be that Brian has done everything absolutely prudently and buttoned up. Of course, you know, he's been disrupting the whole way and lobbying the whole way, and the reputation of a Tether would be perhaps, you know, like you said in your first comment, like, is this a criminal organization? And, you know, they've had all of those connotations. And then where we end up today is, you know, both are phenomenal businesses without going into nuances, but one has, you know, less than 100 people, let's just say, and is, you know, allegedly the most profitable per employee organization in history. And, you know, the other has thousands and thousands of individuals. And so you end up with two incredibly different cultures and organizations, whilst both are incredible. Which one would you have choose to work at?
Good question. I wish I stuck with Tether. I'll tell you that.
I didn't want to say.
I wish, yeah. But I think I think. Look, I'm going to go back to my originally what got me into this, which is emerging markets, and so therefore I would choose Tether. And so Tether really does God's work in emerging markets. I mean, that's, yes, remittances and retail kind of stablecoin impact is much smaller than the trader side, but it's still an impact. And Paolo's passion is emerging markets. It's where I kind of come from, and it's where my passion is, right? This is what you and I started a conversation on, which is the real impact in the world of this technology. The real impact of this world, of this technology in the world, is kind of on that retail. It's you know, having when you are in Argentina or places in Zimbabwe or similar, right? All you care about is how many eggs can you get for your family and milk and etc., and that your money is what it says it is. So that you don't wake up the next day and you can't afford the basics. And so this is what I think is extremely fascinating.
Yeah, and I have taken up a lot of your precious time, so I'm just going to quickly wrap on this Mana round, and then I know you've got a live show that you need to go to. So just a couple more questions. If you could have the front page of your favorite publication, what would be the message that you would put onto it?
Wow. Okay. You didn't prep me for this one. So, the main publication would probably be The Atlantic.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
I appreciate The Atlantic very much. I appreciate the deep writing and the critical analysis. What would I wanted to say is probably, you know, probably something around helping each other. I know that might sound romantic, but reality is, I go back to how you and I started this conversation, and it really is the only thing ultimately that we will all care about when we are really old, which is how did you show up for other people, and what did you do, and how did you impact somebody else's life. Making money is amazing. Money gives us freedom, buys us things. But I do think that ultimately, you know, it's very easy to be spiritual and go off a camp in Bali and India, you know, call yourself a spiritual person, but try being spiritual in London or New York or, you know, these crazy places when you are fighting for power and you have to make the company grow, right? I still think it's extremely important to be collaborative, to be broader in thinking, to consider, and to really, even when you feel that you have, you know, encountered your enemy or somebody you're competing with, I think it's still important to be authentic, be honest with your team, and to really help people along the way. Because I think people just want to grow and they want to build. And I think that, you know, may sound naive to lots of people, but I think ultimately that is exactly what makes us happy.
And when you, you know, getting yourself ready for the day, and, you know, as you mentioned, you're quite a spiritual person, whilst there's a lot of pressure that you put on yourself to abide by those values and principles and ambitions that you have, how do you prepare yourself into the day? You know, do you have particular rituals, or what's the way that you make sure that you come in balanced and your best self?
Yeah, I wish I had a routine every day. I used to. Sometimes there are periods where I have it every day and then it goes out the window like any normal person. But I think number one is gratitude. I wake up grateful even for the shit that happens. And I just, sometimes it's hard. It is definitely hard to be grateful for when you have, as you said, pressure, and when you have negative emails and people asking things and you're trying to get stuff done. But I try to put it, you know, even with us, like the other day, right, we had to reschedule our thing. I was at first like, oh my God, I had something else I needed to do. And, you know, it kind of reshuffled my day completely, by the way. But 3 hours later, I kid you not, I was like well, it's okay. That happened for a reason because I was able to do this. So thank you actually for doing that. This is all meant to happen when it's meant to happen.
So is that just instilled at this point into, the chimp in the mind, just everything for you, maybe the grounding of how you brought up then? You had that gratitude, or you've had to learn it? Do you have to refresh yourself? It's one of the most valuable things. It's mastery to have that type of ability to do what you just said, when some idiot like me has just rescheduled your precious time. I apologize.
No,
Thanks for being great.
I think it's I have to refresh. I'm only human, but I think it was a learned capability, and definitely installed a lot by my mother. Yeah. Who, despite every time I called her and started complaining, she would say, turn that into a compliment, complaints into a compliment. And I think I have to refresh myself, although part of it is monkey brain already. And when things happen, I just try to go there really quickly.
I want to ask you a personal question then. On this topic, and again, we need to do another show on this one. I feel like you'd be very wise to answer many of my questions, because I've listened to a lot of wise people and tried to practice some of these behaviors that I think allow you to be balanced and stoic when there's pressures, and this makes for good investors, and you have to learn it or you'll crumble. I find I can sometimes be a bit preachy, and I don't really want to be that guy. So I come across these scenarios where I can see the behavior, and I'm like, it's so annoying because you're such a fortunate person, and really this is just a tiny little niggle compared to this amazingness. And in either your team or your peers or your personal life, you have to choose. Should I just bite my tongue? And so to make that more specific, if it's somebody who you really care about, and you feel like over time, as your mum obviously would do with her daughter, you're trying to install that very valuable principle. What do you do? So I don't know how to get this right. I'd love to know how you must come across this the whole time.
I don't think I get it right at all. And my brother, if he was listening to this, which he will, he would say, I'm on the receiving end of that. So he definitely got it from me for a long time. And I think where I started to learn otherwise, and it was when he cut me off, not in terms of a relationship, but until he said, enough. I'm a grown man. Like, I know this, and I think it comes from obviously being an older sister and seeing a lot of things in my life that were not nice either when I was younger. And so I don't think I get it right, Lloyd, all the time, but I definitely, I'm not sure I get that from anybody around me yet, that I tend to do that. I'm sure there are things that I do that need to be fixed. Well, one thing I did learn is I'm always open to constructive criticism, and I actually want people that I work with to tell me. It's the same thing when you're meeting a person and they have like broccoli in their teeth and you don't tell them. Like, I would love people to tell me that I have broccoli in my teeth, right? And so I think it's very important. I also am of a belief that you shouldn't really take advice from everybody. That you should take it in consideration and think about it and be reflective. But it depends on the situation, or what the situation is, and how it develops. And I think for me, in terms of the team, we're really all independent. There isn't really kind of preaching to each other and at all, actually. Quite the opposite. Everybody has ideas and running around doing them. And I don't think there's any preaching. I actually would like it to be a little bit more constructive in general, because I think we learn like that as human beings. I'm open to learning. I also understand that a lot of other people are not open to learning, so they just want to do their own thing, which is fine.
On the next show, I'll just criticize you for half an hour. I'm really good at it. Final question. So Mana is your magic superpower in gaming. It means that you might be able to jump really high, run really quick, have amazing sword skills. Well, what would you say your mana is?
I love that, by the way. I've looked at it in your other interviews and I was like, what does he mean by this? And then I realized it's what I call a God particle. I was telling my husband, I was like, he heard me say that. At first he was like, you're weird, and I would ask people, I would literally come up to him and say, what's your God particle? Like in interviews, I was like, what is your God particle? Like this woman is weird. But really that's what it is. Like, what is our God particle? We all have that God particle if we allow ourselves to just be that. And I think mine is, we're doing this obviously over Zoom. But I always get one thing, which is people just open up with me. And I tend to see the unseen. This was something my 2-3 previous bosses have said constantly. You tend to see the unseen. And first time I got that, I was like, all right, this person is really tired. Like, I don't know what that means, right? And brushed it away. Second time in my second job, that came about as well. And then third time in GE, and constantly then at O Group prior to FG, I'm an investor in a lot of companies. A lot of my portfolio companies will come and say, wow, you just have an ability to clarify for me and get the best out of me. And so I take deep pride in that. There are many, many people out there that I've spoken to who've called me and said, you're better than any investor I've ever spoken to. You just have an ability to drive us into places that it's much more clear and we know, and you get a confidence out of us. At G, there was a joke, and after that too, is that I had a nickname, which was Wendy from Billions, and I thought to myself, this is crazy. But it was that ability to really kind of drag the best out of people, right? To install that confidence in a moment for them to see who they are. And I think that I would love to say something about me, but it really is that about others, if that makes any sense. Like I'm able to do that for others.
Yeah, incredible. I don't know how often we've had that zone. I'll look back, but I love it. And we conducted this really big piece of R&D through Mana Lab with Imperial College when IBM Watson was still around before it was a bigot, and then they took it down across 200 companies, trying to find what the essence of a good leader is. And of course, this is a very nuanced question, but it's interesting research. And the main critique was empathy. To be a really good leader, you need to have empathy. What does that mean? And why is that good? And why that's good is that you have to be able to understand both sides. You have to be able to put yourself into somebody's shoes. And so, certainly meeting you immediately, I felt like I could open up. There's a skill you have. And I think if I think back to why that was, it's maybe you're quite direct. So it's not just generic conversation. So I have to be thoughtful. And so then you get to know the individual and you can empathize. And if we look in your background, maybe that's because there's been different experiences. So whether that makes you good at understanding, business and strategy is one thing, but to understand the person and the individual and how to get the most out of them is the greatest leadership skill set. So that makes loads of sense. I love it. I don't think we've had that what is it, that little god, what do you call it?
God particle. Yeah, but I think you are right. One thing, it's really interesting what you just said. I get that a lot. People tell me I'm quite direct, and it's interesting because most people, right, are thrown off by authenticity and directness at first because they're like, wait, I is she for real? Like, is this normal? And then they kind of get to know you, and then they can't help when I share something personal. There's this whole concept in the Western world, don't overshare. What reality is, the life moves so goddamn fast with these technologies and the things that we are doing. If I can't just be direct with you on where I'm at and what I'm trying to get to and where you're at and what are you trying to get to, then we're going to have a lot of calls that are going to be wasted, right? And so I think here's one prediction, and here's one thing that I'm thinking about. The more we go in the future, and we are bombarded with technology and we have intervention from AI, the more people will be direct.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to waste time because there's so much going on outside of this that I cannot do this fake. I'd rather go and do it somewhere else if you don't want to, right?
And we're only using, general statistic of 10% of our brain power. And I'm reading this really cool book at the moment where it's basically predicting the future, and we'll start using more because of artificial intelligence. And I think the parts that we'll use, and it's not to overly flatter you, I don't want to do that, but it's somewhere in that kind of oracle zone you've got there. Like, you could break it down to 1,000 things that are happening there that allow for good relationship of information, good trust. And like, when you see the serendipity and where that can obviously lead to, is so incredibly valuable. And that's where I think managers will go, but that's where decision makers will start spending their time to hone into that type of skill set.
That's right.
So unbelievable. Look, I know that you need to run. Thank you so much for coming onto the show, Maja.
Thank you so much for having me.
Is I'll put a bunch of stuff in the show notes. I'll let you run, and we should immediately have another conversation because there's so much more that I'd love to cover, and so much value for an audience. But thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on this edition of the Searching for Mana podcast. We hope you've enjoyed it and hope to see you again next time. Please subscribe to our YouTube, Spotify, or iTunes to make sure you receive all the latest episodes as they are released.